Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a deeply methodical, highly analytical, and honestly, a slightly chilling journey. We are going to completely unpack the psychological breakdown of one of modern fiction's most notorious figures, Light Yagami. Through a carefully constructed cinematic dossier, we're going to examine the entire philosophical and psychological architecture behind a god complex, and figure out exactly how a seemingly perfect honor student descends into absolute terrifying megalomania. True monsters are rarely born in the shadows. Most often, they are forged in the blinding light of perfection. We absolutely have to start with this incredibly dark and foundational premise. It sets the stage for everything we are about to explore. It tells us right out of the gate that the infamous Death Note did not actually corrupt Light Yagami. Instead, it simply acted as the catalyst. The malice? It was already there, just waiting for the exact right conditions to bloom. And to truly understand this transformation, we are going to follow a 5-act structure laid out in our dossier. Act 1. The burden of boredom. Okay, let's dive into the pathology of a god complex, using what's called the diathesis stress model. Step 1 is the latent vulnerability. For Light, this is his extreme, off-the-charts intelligence, paired with a paralyzing chronic boredom. He already possesses latent dark triad traits, but they're being held in check by the standard guardrails of society. Step 2 is the environmental trigger, or the stress. That's the discovery of the Death Note, a completely zero-consequence environment that permanently removes the threat of societal accountability. And then, step 3 is the pathological outbreak. Without those guardrails holding him back, megalomania violently emerges. The notebook was essentially just fertilizer for seeds that were already firmly planted in his psyche. If we analyze this through Peirce's triad of visual semiotics, which is basically a way of breaking down a sign, its object, and its deeper meaning, we can decode the recurring imagery associated with Light's transformation. Take the bright crimson apple, for instance. It's a very clear Genesis illusion, representing forbidden divine knowledge, temptation, and ultimately spiritual rot. Then you have the Death Note itself. Physically, sure, it's just a black notebook, but symbolically, it is the physical instrument of unregulated absolute authority over human life. It represents the very dangerous illusion of subjective justice superseding systemic law. Moving right along to Act 2, the justification of cruelty.
So once the first lives are actually taken, how does a supposedly model citizen reconcile his self-image with the reality of his brutal actions? Well, following his first 2 executions, Light actually experiences acute psychological trauma. We're talking insomnia, severe weight loss, it's massive cognitive dissonance. He genuinely believes, I am a good person, but the stark reality is, I just committed double homicide. To protect his extremely fragile ego, his psyche just fractures into a grandiose delusion. He utilizes psychologist Albert Bandura's mechanisms of moral disengagement. First, he uses moral justification to reconstruct heinous acts as having a benevolent purpose. Next, he uses advantageous comparison, weighing his executions as somehow negligible when compared against global crime. And finally, dehumanization, reducing his victims to literal wastes of space. Because in his mind, if he is a god, then his killings aren't crimes. They are acts of holy purification. Here is the absolute crucial point, though. This grandiose privet completely corrupts his utilitarian logic. He starts out in phase 1 with contained logic, strictly targeting death row inmates. But classical utilitarianism requires an objective measure of good. By appointing himself as the sole subjective arbiter of what good is, Light contaminates the whole system with his own massive ego. This inevitably leads to phase 2, narcissistic rage, and finally phase 3, unrestricted tyranny. Because once his utopian world depends entirely on his own survival, literally anyone hindering him becomes a justifiable target. He rapidly shifts from targeting convicted criminals to executing completely innocent FBI agents, like Ray Penber, simply to protect his own skin. Act 3. The Mask of Perfection. Now, what's really fascinating here is that to the outside world, he completely remains the golden boy. But looking beneath that perfectly manicured mask, Light perfectly fits the clinical diagnosis of the dark triad. First up, Machiavellianism, the strict belief that the ends justify the means. He meticulously instrumentalizes human beings as if they were just chess pieces. Second, psychopathy. He has a complete absence of effective empathy, paired with flawless emotional mimicry. He demonstrates this by maintaining an eerily low heart rate to beat lie detector tests, and by using what's called instrumental empathy to ruthlessly manipulate Misa Amani. And third, narcissism, a desperate requirement for excessive admiration.
He adopts the moniker Kira specifically to seek mass worship, and he suffers extreme narcissistic injury when challenged. Just think back to when he executed the decoy Lind L. Taylor on live television out of sheer, unadulterated rage. This wildly complex psychology places Light right at the center of a much larger philosophical theater, clashing directly with the ethical frameworks of everyone trying to stop him. Light operates under radical act utilitarianism, the terrifying idea that a crime-free world mathematically justifies absolute execution. Contrast that directly with L, who represents rule utilitarianism and law-based rationalism. L relies entirely on procedure and empirical deduction. Then you have Light's own father, Soichiro Yagami, representing Kantian deontology, where strict adherence to institutional legality means murder is intrinsically unacceptable no matter the reason. And finally, Nier, who embodies detached proceduralism. He is clinical, completely unemotional, and outright rejects the sovereign's moral authority altogether.
Light brilliantly weaponizes his societal privilege, being the police chief's son and a top-tier student, as his perfect mask. Society rarely questions the people who perfectly fit its definition of success. But maintaining this intense dual identity produces acute paranoia. Look at his total refusal to take the Shinigami eyes. He refuses to have his lifespan for the power to see names. But actually, this isn't simply a human survival instinct. It is pure, unfiltered, messianic delusion. He genuinely believes his personal existence is the sole anchor holding the entire moral universe together.
Which brings us to Act 4, the megalomania of Kira. This absolute, unshakable belief in his own divinity pushes us into the absolute darkest phase of the story. It's a flawless example of philosopher Michel Foucault's theory of biopolitics in action. Kira essentially forces the global public to internalize his rules through the creation of a supernatural panopticon. By executing criminals entirely anonymously from a distance, he projects this terrifying, invisible, all-knowing gaze. The public complies, but not out of some shared moral consensus. No, they comply out of a paralyzing fear of instant, unmediated death. He bypasses all standard legal and rational state institutions, drawing his power entirely from narrative, propaganda, and his own terrifyingly dark charisma. And the visual architecture of the series perfectly mirrors this megalomania. Notice the shattered glass heavily featured in the promotional art. At first glance, it looks like this divine, Renaissance-style light, but upon closer inspection, you realize it is sharp, dangerous, and heavily fractured. It perfectly symbolizes that Kira's so-called divine authority is a deceptive illusion masking a cold, totally broken reality. Look at the chains of delusion, too. When handcuffed to L, Light literally wraps his unclasped cuff around his own body, representing his intense delusion of control, while in reality, he's being tightly caged by his own sins. And observe the morality of the lighting itself. The Death Note perpetually rests in dark shadow, while Light constantly steps into and out of harsh sunlight, which beautifully illustrates his constant, frantic negotiation between his golden boy facade and his rapid descent into absolute darkness. Finally, Act 5, the final judgment. Because, let's be real, no illusion lasts forever. We finally enter the dramatic conclusion where the ticking pocket watch abruptly stops, the glass shatters, and the whole screen fades to black. This brilliantly illustrates the ultimate deconstruction of his god complex, especially when we compare how the climax is handled across the two mediums. In the anime's tragic staircase ending, Light is presented somewhat romantically. He collapses quietly, passing a vision of his uncorrupted younger self, and he's given a relatively peaceful release. But the original manga delivers the pathetic warehouse. And wow, is it different. Light never escapes. Cornered and bleeding out, his god complex is violently, unceremoniously stripped away. He thrashes, he screams, he literally begs for his life, spending his final moments in absolute, unvarnished terror. It's a brutal demystification. He is not a tragic hero at the end. He is just a terrified mortal forced to experience the exact same helplessness he ruthlessly inflicted on thousands of others. So what is the final synthesis of this cinematic dossier? What does this all mean? Ultimately, it exposes the absolute futility of the sovereign illusion. Light Yagami was utterly consumed by the very rot he swore he was going to eradicate. He deeply desired to be the god of a new world, but he remained a slave to his own human nature, petty, arrogant, and highly, highly mortal. And perhaps the most damning point of all, the manga's epilogue reveals that after his death, the world rapidly reverts right back to its original crime-ridden state. His panoptic peace was just a fragile illusion built entirely on terror. It proves, once and for all, that systemic rot literally cannot be cured by a dictator's pen. Which leaves us with this final, truly haunting question to consider today. The tragedy of Light Yagami isn't just a story about a magical notebook. It's a very dark mirror held directly up to human nature.
If we had the absolute power to reshape the world with zero consequences, how long would it take for our own righteous justice to become completely indistinguishable from absolute evil? It's a question that lingers long after the screen fades to black. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I will see you next time.